Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome to episode 274 of the Last Round Podcast. No Danny Z today. He's stuck in New York. His flight got delayed. So we have special guest Jeremiah Preisser, part owner, editor, writer and co-host for Grueling Truth, staff writer for Ring News 24, and a member of the Transnational Boxing Rankings Board. It's a nice short introduction for you there, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I'm a nice short introduction kind of guy, man. I mean, I don't want the credentials to overwhelm. I don't want it to be all about the credentials. I just want to sit here and talk boxing and hopefully keep people interested. So I'm happy to be on, man. I appreciate you inviting me here.
So before we kind of jump into it, how long have you been in the boxing media landscape then?
I would say roughly since 2014. I've been a fan since 2004. Well, I would say a hardcore fan. I mean, I saw some Nassim Hamed stuff on Showtime, in the late 90s, but it wasn't really until Tuesday and Friday night fights. It was actually a Friday night fight. It was Lamar Murphy versus Damian Fuller. Two fringe contenders, but it was Teddy Atlas who made it sound like a science. And so I just became hooked after that, and then eventually I got a podcast gig, a writing gig over at the Grueling Truth. And so I'd say about since 2014, I've been doing it off and on. Yeah,
you definitely wouldn't have guessed that fight was the fight that got you hooked on boxing. Absolutely not.
Yeah, well, yeah. Now most people are, Mike Tyson or Lennox Lewis, some other big name, especially heavyweights. I mean, the heavyweights are the catalyst for a lot of people's fandom, but it was just Atlas who made it sound, he made it feel like a science. It seemed more than two guys punching themselves in the face. I mean, again, I dabbled here and there, but it was Fuller he was this fringe contender guy, but he was tall, lanky like myself. Good jab, and he did a lot of nuanced things, kind of chinny though, so he never made it right. Diego Corrales ended up stopping him pretty early, but yeah, it was just Teddy Atlas. I mean, he just did it for me, and I tuned in every Tuesday and Friday after that.
Never really replaced Teddy Atlas. Never really replaced him.
No, they shouldn't have. It's been the complaints over at ESPN have been pretty hot and heavy, even with Andre Ward. I mean, I think Andre Ward's pretty tempered in his approach, and a lot of people appreciate him. He was that kind of guy in the ring too, kind of like a water kind of guy. Like he did whatever was necessary to win. Like if you weren't good at, inside fighting, that's what he would try to do. If you weren't good at outside fighting, that would be a strategy. But it's Timothy Bradley and, Joe Tessitore and all the hyperbole. It's just worn on people, especially the old school guys who don't feel like the air needs to be filled every second of the match, right? It's like sometimes we don't want everything interpreted for us. We just want to watch the action and enjoy it and figure out things for ourselves. But there's a lot of not only complaints over there, but other places as well, the Zone and others.
Love or hate Paulie Malignaggi?
I like Paulie Malignaggi. I've always rated him as one of the better commentators. I mean, he's nuanced. He's got a good boxing brain, and you could see just from watching his career. I mean, he was the kind of guy who couldn't get by with his power, so he had to be in shape for 12 rounds every fight. I like him. I mean, his downfall was, by and large, the product of his political leanings, and I don't really care about that personally. I just want to listen to good commentary, and if we want to start picking and choosing, there's a lot not to like about a good amount of commentators. I mean, but it's, for me, he's nuanced, he's well spoken. I've liked some of his crossover stuff with the British commentators as well. I just think he's good. I think he's nuanced, and I think that's important in today's game.
Yeah, sidetracked completely there quite early.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so jumping straight into the fight reviews last week, Friday the 7th of June from the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, Hollywood, Florida on Triller pay-per-view. Blair Cobbs moved to 17-1-1 with a unanimous decision 10 over Adrien Broner, who dropped to 35-5-1. So, Jeremiah, going into this, before the fight, how did you have this?
Well, I mean, I had it basically how it played out. I mean, Broner has been so spotty with his record, and he's had fights canceled. He hasn't followed through with a lot of stuff, and he just hasn't been a world-class operator for many, many years now. For me, as soon as he went from 135 to 147, that was kind of the turning point. And I speak about this a lot, on Twitter, social media, other places, I guess X, but it's whenever you start giving up the advantages that made you effective in a lower division, that's when things again start to go downhill. Broner was excellent at 135. I mean, he was just one for all the crap that people give him, he was one fight away from being the champion, like the Ring Magazine champion, lineal champion. All he had to do was beat I forget his name now, but Miguel Vasquez, the guy who, not a very exciting guy, but they were 1 and 2 in the division, and Broner would have been a fairly heavy favorite over him. So as soon as he goes to 147 and he starts chasing money, for me, that was kind of his undoing. But he's had a lot of personal problems. These are all well documented. As I said, he's been spotty. He hasn't been showing up for fights. And when he showed up against Blair Cobbs, he looked like he had been, eating ribs at a family, cookout beforehand. I mean, he just kind of had this gut. He looked a bit old. I mean, you still saw the stuff that made him what he was early on, but the problem is, again, when he was at 135, he was always kind of reliant on single shots. He was fast, but and he was physically stronger. But against guys like Blair Cobbs and other bigger guys, you just can't get away with that sort of thing. And Cobbs, he's not a world-class operator in my opinion, but he did what he had to do. His work rate was fairly good. His southpaw style, gave Broner some issues. If you watch the fight, he dropped him, I believe it was in the second round, a nice little overhand left through the guard. And he just kept his work rate high enough to where Broner's single shots weren't really, they weren't as effective. They didn't count for as much. And it was just kind of a Blair Cobb kind of performance, in my opinion. Like, he's not stellar. He doesn't have any X factor. He's entertaining, when it comes to the verbal aspect of the game. But I think Golden Boy they should keep him in fights like that, like winnable fights that sell pretty well, because I just don't see his career progressing much beyond that. Like, just keep him busy. If he gets a title shot, fine. But I don't think he's a world-class level kind of operator.
Sadly, probably not the last we've seen of Adrien Broner.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, he's one of those guys who sells well. I mean, it's funny because even if you're kind of obnoxious, a lot of people don't like you, like Zab Judah, for instance. If people don't like you, they are still going to, you become an endearing figure afterwards, because because you hang around. It's kind of like you're making up for the failings of your past, right? Like seeing a guy who used to be highly touted, potential pound for pound guy. It was cool to see him. I mean, it's again, he's just kind of making up for the things he did in the past.
Looking back on Broner's career, 4-weight world champion somehow, overrated, underrated?
Well, I think underrated in a sense because people like to take a dookie on his whole career. They like to say, oh, well, he was overhyped. He didn't really beat anybody elite. And I'm largely of that opinion too. I mean, he had struggles going way back to Quintero when he won a majority decision. I mean, if you watch the fight, it's been forever, but he arguably got outworked in that one. Ponce de Leon, I thought, outboxed him. Like the cracks were in the foundation fairly early on. And again, he didn't really beat any elite guys on the way up. His performance against DeMarco was excellent. But again, the reason I say he's underrated in a sense is because he was just one fight away from being the champion at 135, which is a historical division. I mean, that would have etched his names in the history books forever. But it also did come with the price tag of the Ring magazine, putting him in the top 5 pound for pound. And in retrospect, that was it was just too hasty, right? I mean, it wasn't warranted. He may have looked the part, but he wasn't the part. And I say this a lot, looking and being are two different things. And until, the wheat gets separated from the chaff, we don't really know. But I would say overrated generally just because fans put too much emphasis on the 4 division thing. If you have good matchmaking, 4 division titleist, and I emphasize titleist, not champion, but a 4 division title holders, it's not nearly as rare as it used to be. So I would say overrated.
Broner's only 34. He says he stopped drinking, stopped doing drugs. He keeps himself in the gym. He's got rid of all of the bad circle of people around him. If he keeps that up, do you think we can see maybe a glimpse of the old Adrien, the problem Broner?
No, I think that's past. And if boxing is such a tough sport, to excel at in general, living cleanly is typically something you want to do beforehand. Look, Bernard Hopkins is an excellent example. You want to live clean before you get to the top, not after you've gotten to the top. And 34 is, it's in modern terms, it's not particularly old, but in boxing terms, it's a very nuanced discussion, right? Like some guys like Fernando Vargas were over the hill in their 20s, so it depends on who you fight, how you treat your body. And looking at the Blair Cobbs fight, I just don't think there's much he can do to kind of right the ship. And so, if he wants to, I would just try to get in fights that make good money. That would be my strategy.
You were matchmaking for Broner. What similar aged people that sell tickets would you try to match him with, do you think?
Oh man, if this was years ago, I'd probably say see if you can pull Andre Berto or Victor Ortiz or something out of retirement and, see if you can just make something fun. But at this point, the heavyweight division is in the welterweight division is in a transition phase. It's looking pretty weak besides Ennis at the moment. 140 has some guys who are aging as well, but I still think they're too good for him. It's like I don't think I'd even put him in with somebody like Victor Postol, who is pretty inactive, but has shown up every time that he's been matched. So I'm not even sure. Again, I would keep it sort of like Blair Cobb's level, but I can't even pick any names out of the air at the moment who I think he would have a good shot against.
I like Victor Ortiz one because I posted recently on Twitter because somebody had posted on Facebook claiming they were trying to matchmake for him. So he's still in and around. He's still got that name. Obviously, he had the fight against Mayweather where Mayweather kind of cheap shotted him. I like that. I like that as a matchup. Broner, Victor Ortiz.
Yeah, I mean Ortiz is he's past it too, but he's I mean if you watch the Berto fight, I mean it again for me this is about remnants of what they have left, and Ortiz isn't gonna. You just want these guys to make money at this point. You want them to be able to retire with some sort of padding to their checkbook. And I would just probably pick some old welterweight out of there. I don't know, Robert Guerrero. I don't know if he'd still be interested. Berto, Ortiz. Those are the kind of names that pop to my mind. There's not a whole lot of guys like that at 140, so just have to make concessions.
Kell Brook, Amir Khan, someone like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think even those guys would be probably too good at this point, but it's just a money-making endeavor, and I think that's all it should be.
Moving on, Saturday, the 8th of June from Madison Square Gardens Theatre, New York on ESPN+, Xander Zayas moved to 19-0 with a unanimous decision 10 over former champion Patrick Teixeira, dropped to 34-5. Good fight, a good step-up fight, I thought, for Xander Zayas, slowly but surely moving him on. Obviously, top ranks, youngest ever signing at like 16 or something like that. So it's good to see that they're kind of slowly moving him.
Yeah, I mean, nobody moves people better than Top Rank. I mean, I think that's been proven time and time again. And I think Teixeira was a good step up too. I mean, Teixeira is a rock solid guy. He's been around the block. He knows his way around the ring. And Zayas is fairly young, but I like Zayas. I mean, he doesn't when I'm looking for a prospect, I'm always looking for the X factor, right? Like, do they have big power? What's their technique like? What's their hand speed like? Do they display some defensive capabilities that seem above the rest? How do they combine these things? It's hard to tell where Zayas actually is, just because technically he's very good. His power is solid, his hand speed is solid. He puts together combinations really well. I like his punch diversity. He's very pragmatic in his approach. He will throw body shots if that makes the most sense. He'll throw head shots if that makes the most sense. He will change levels. He does a lot of the things I really like to see. It's just Teixeira, for what he's worth, and he is a good fighter, he just didn't throw as many punches as I would like. And of course, some of that is Zayas, but when I'm looking at a prospect like Zayas, I'm waiting for the acid test, right? The tangible things are great, the hand speed, the power, et cetera, et cetera. Back to my Zab Judah reference, right? I mean, he had a lot of the physical things you look for in a guy who you think might hit the elite. Zayas is pretty close to that as well, but I'm looking for the intangibles. And did Teixeira, did he test his chin? Did he just make it hard on Zayas? And I don't think he did. But I think at this stage, that's okay. He's fighting a better guy, a guy who's comfortable around the ring, didn't fold when he started getting punched. When the combinations were flying, he maintained his composure. And so it's a good step up. It's a good step up. But I don't like to make any concrete predictions about guys until, do they get hurt when they get hit cleanly? I still think there's a lot of questions there, but so far so good. And for Top Rank, if they can keep this guy active and improving his skill, I would predict that he's going to be a player at 154. The top guy, again, I just don't know. There's still much to be had there.
You're the second person that, and I'm not saying that you're saying that he's not going to be a world champion, but you're the second person that's not too sure on Xander Zayas. I think Kevin Ioli was the other one that came on the show and had a similar kind of review of him.
Yeah, and I think it's just because he, like, offensively, he gets so much done, but there's not a whole lot coming back at him. Teixeira hit him cleanly a few times, but nothing like real big and real clean. And he's kind of a slow guy too. So Zayas he made him miss wildly a good number of times. But if I'm saying does he win a title, I would say it's likely. If you are with Top Rank, they'll maneuver you into some WBO shot. They're pretty good at that. But it's more of like, does he become the top of the division? I just don't know yet. Again, I just need to see his chin tested. I need to see his, when somebody presses him and lets loose, how does he react? But again, so far so good.
So I'm giving you the Top Rank matchmaker hat. Who would you pick to give him the acid test that would give us the barometer of whether you think he would become a world champion or someone in the top five, something like that?
Well, part of the problem with the division is PBC controls so many of the top guys that we've seen this over the years. We saw it at welterweight with Bud Crawford. Some of these guys kind of get locked out because PBC owns too many, and these guys don't really play ball with one another. But I wouldn't mind seeing them against I don't know, maybe Brian Mendoza. I think would be a rock solid fight. Mendoza's a good puncher, but he's not really an elite level guy. Like when he's generally when he steps up to the elite, he gets a little more gun shy. But I'd like to see if Zayas could handle his power, right? Like what happens if he gets hit cleanly. So Ramos to me is he's a good test, but not severe enough to to upset the apple cart. I would like to see that again. With Ramos's power, who knows? With Zayas's chin, again, it's still a question mark. But it's those things that I have to see. And Ramos to me is kind of like a fringe level guy who kind of represents, he gatekeeps and represents whether or not Zayas could, move up, and advance up that ladder. So probably Ramos. Uh, you know, I'm trying to think of who else might be, especially on the top rank side. Um, I mean, I'm looking at the list of names here. Like, Michel Soro is a good fighter. He's relatively old at this point, but keeps winning. He's a good boxer, but not a particularly big puncher. So I'm not exactly sure if he represents the kind of test that I would like to see. But maybe he's a good mover. But it's really those top 15 back end top 10 kind of guys that I want to see him tested against.
Who are three prospects that you're high on right now?
That is a difficult question because I try not to get too ahead of myself with a lot of these guys just because they look like Carrington, for instance, a guy who fought over the weekend. Like technically he's good. I like his confidence. He will stay in the pocket and he'll unleash power shots. Combinations look good. The confidence is there, but the opposition has been pretty poor. So it's like I like what I see thus far, but again, unless you're like a Vasil Lomachenko guy who I was high on, pretty, early on. I went to his debut against Ramirez, and I told a lot of people and my brother, and I was like, this guy's going to be pretty darn good, and it was the same with Usyk. I was like, well, I think he's going to be the next best cruiserweight since Holyfield, but I don't see a lot of names out there at the moment who I would kind of rubber stamp. I was pretty high on Stanionis for a bit, but with his inactivity, because he used to spar Miguel Cotto, and Freddie Roach said good things about him, and Freddie Roach is a renowned trainer when it comes to offense. So initially, I was like, Stanionis is probably one of those guys who's going to be pretty good, but over time, his power hasn't fleshed out as well as I would like. I thought he was a bigger hitter than he's turned out to be. So I like Stanionis, I like Zayas, I like Carrington.
If you're a Prince Naseem Hamed fan, do you like Ben Whittaker?
I do. I do like Whittaker, but again, it's the opposition thing for me. I think he's a crowd pleaser, and I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, a number of the British guys have been lately. I would kind of class Josh Kelly like that too. He doesn't play it up as much, but he's very flashy and has this kind of like arms down, hit me if you can kind of style. Sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't. It's kind of weird when it comes to the nuance of things. Like, sometimes we'll see a guy and it's like, well, I just don't like the way he throws a left hook. Like maybe that's going to be his undoing. But I like Whittaker so far. But it is one of those things like I just need more out of him. So at the moment, there's no prospect that I'm real high on. Like I said, I've got my eye on a few: Stanionis, Zayas, Carrington, but they got to get more active and they've got to up their opposition. And until then, like I said, I'm just not rubber stamping anybody.
Moving on, fight previews this Saturday the 15th of June from Selhurst Park Football Ground, Crystal Palace. It's on Sky Sports in the UK and I think Peacock maybe in the US for us. Chris Billam-Smith, 19-1, goes up against former foe Richard Riakporhe, who's 17-0 for the WBO Cruiserweight World Championship. Chris Billam-Smith's only blemish on his record is to Richard Riakporhe. So how do you see this one?
Well, I think it's tough. I feel like Smith has gotten better afterwards. I think he's done a lot of good work in light of the loss. But it is stylistically, I think it's a hard fight for him. And I still favor Riakporhe.
Mm.
I think stylistically he's just a notch. I just think he's better in that regard. I think Billam-Smith is going to have a hard time closing the distance, and I think it's going to play out. I mean, I think Riakpo's gotten better as well. So I don't. I think it's one of those things where they've both kind of ascended in similar fashion, and I think Riakpo is. I favor him to eke out a decision. I think Billam-Smith has improved. I think he's gonna do a bit better job of closing the distance, but I don't think I think Riakpo's jab is gonna be the key factor here, and I think he's gonna earn a points verdict here.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, to be honest. I think Chris Billam-Smith, unfortunately, just still eats too many punches. And I thought he wasn't doing too well against Masternak if he didn't manage to break Masternak's ribs, which sounds kind of odd, right? Because he stopped him. But he was probably like losing the rounds. And then he kind of had the perfect storm in the fact that he faced Lawrence Okolie, who was a former training sparring member of his team. Obviously, Okolie had left, gone to a different coach. So he had Shane McGuigan, who knew everything about Okolie. So he knew what he did well. He knew his weak points. He'd been a sparring partner for him. So if you were going to go into a world championship fight, you couldn't really go more prepared. So I think the fact that, Chris Billam-Smith is the world champion kind of, I wouldn't know if he's really good enough to be a world champion.
Yeah, and I think the Masternak example is a good one because, Masternak, if we're saying that correctly, is just kind of like an over the hill, like contender. Like he used to be a contender when he was, in his prime, but to me, he's been over the hill for years. He's still a wily guy, but like you said, Billam-Smith, especially at cruiserweight, when you start jumping the divisions, it's harder and harder to take punches no matter what your chin is like. There are only rare guys who can consistently take punches at that level, and Billam-Smith, I don't think he's one of those guys.
Yeah, Richard Riakporhe's knocked out his last five, and I think Chris Billam-Smith's just lack of head movement, it's probably going to be his downfall. And I think he either gets stopped or maybe his corner stops it like late in the rounds because he's just going to keep eating too many jabs, eating too many right hands. And I think we'll see the new, unfortunately, on Saturday in Riakporhe's back garden as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Also on that card, we have Isaac Chamberlain, 16-2, up against Jack Massey, who's 21-2 for the Commonwealth and EBU Cruiserweight Championships. And then also someone we just spoke about, Ben Whittaker, goes up against someone who cannot pronounce their name, Uretsi Eraza Aranka, for the vacant Right, no, exactly. It might even change come Saturday. For the vacant WBA Gold Light Heavyweight Championship. So kind of just quickly going into Ben Whittaker, someone you think if he kind of concentrates a little bit more when we get to the bigger names, someone who has enough talent to be a world champion?
I mean, potentially. I mean, so far so good. But it's so hard to tell with these guys. Like I like Felix Cash myself.
I did. I really liked him.
Yeah, I mean, I like Cash, and that was a guy that I watched, good amateur background, technically very good, always in phenomenal shape. In fact, I'm jealous of how good of a shape he is. But he looked like one of those guys I thought from the outset was potential title holder. Whittaker is kind of the same thing, It's like, at a domestic level, he's blowing them away. He's got, good amateur background as well. Good power, solid hand speed, but we've seen with a number of British light heavyweights, recently, like Yarde and Boatsi, guys who look good, but Whittaker, it's just, again, it's just the opposition level thing for me, and I don't want him to be rushed. Let him take his time. Because eventually a lot of these guys have to learn. Like Junior Witter, another guy who would switch a lot, who would play around a lot. He had, he would do it more earlier in his career, but he had to learn to kind of tone it down, know when to do it. And he ended up carving out a real nice career for himself. And I'm just not sure where I would place Whittaker kind of on the scale. Like, does he wind up better than Yarde or Boatsi? Or I'm just not sure. I just don't like making these sort of declarations early on, just because it's just an opposition thing. I mean, he might be blowing him away now, but if he meets somebody and he can't take a punch, then it was like Nigel Benn, right? Nigel Benn Jr., for instance. Like he got blown away fairly early in his career, right? I'm not mistaken there, right? He did get stopped, right, by that. Who was it? A French journeyman? Am I mistaken there?
You know about Conor Benn?
Yeah, Conor Benn. Sorry, Conor
I
Benn.
think they ended up giving him a draw, even though he got dropped twice and stuff like that. And then he rematched him and beat him.
Yeah. But it's just, again, a lot of these guys look good. But again, looking good and being good are not the same thing. And matchmakers, that's what they do best, right? They're meant to, especially nowadays, they want to maneuver you in a way where you don't have to earn it like you had to in the past. You don't have to beat a legitimate contender. You just have to make a brand. You have to make a brand for yourself, and then they'll get you a title shot because you sell well. So I'm not saying Ben Whitaker is necessarily going to be like that. Maybe he's going to demand that he gets these fights or those fights. I don't know. I'm not ready to rubber stamp him quite yet. But I like what I see.
If you were a talented young fighter coming through, what promotion would you want to sign with?
I mean, I'd probably rather be with Top Rank than anybody. I mean, if I was British, I'd probably go with Matchroom, but it's Top Rank is just the best. They've been doing it for decades and decades. I mean, look at and eventually these guys kind of go elsewhere. Like Terrence Crawford, right? Like he got to this happens everywhere. They get to a stage where they're just kind of too big and they go out and do their own kind of thing. But I would do Top Rank just because, as much as I don't like it, they are the best at not only building fighters but getting them a title shot. I mean, that's why it's called, We Are Bob's Organization, or whatever acronym has been floated out there as a joke, because the WBO is so in cahoots with Bob Arum that it's almost a given. If you look at like Vasil Lomachenko, who I like a ton, right? Vacant WBO shot against Gary Russell, right? Look at Valdez, look at Terrence Crawford. I mean, I think all of his initial title shots were WBO, right? Miguel Cotto gets a 145-pound title shot after losing badly to Austin Trout. He doesn't have to work for it. It's just, I would just be with him because he knows how to do it best, and he's almost certainly going to get you a title shot.
It's true. That is true. Moving on, MGM Grand Garden Arena, Las Vegas on Amazon Prime. Gervonta Davis is back, 29-0 up against Frank Martin, 18-0. This is for the WBA Lightweight World Championship. So, not the fight that I think that we all wanted, even though Frank Martin probably does deserve a shot. How do you see this one going?
Well, I'm always kind of weary of guys like Frank Martin stepping up too soon. As talented as he is, and he is that, it's just, this is the problem with a lot of guys in modern boxing, in my opinion, is they don't move up the more traditional way where they got to beat contenders to earn it. So they go into their big shots lacking that kind of world level experience. And so now it's a big acid test, right? It's like Davis has already been there, right? He's been a title holder, for through 3 divisions. His opposition hasn't been stellar either, but he's kind of been there and done that. Martin is not. That doesn't mean he can't step up and make the most of it, but it is one of those things. It's like when you put a young guy in a position like that, where the crowd is by and large going to be against him, where it's a position you haven't been before, and you're just kind of like and in negotiations, he gets to pick this, he gets to pick the ring side, he gets more of the money, he gets this, he kind of gets to dictate terms, and he should, but these young guys would have more leveraging if they took on the contenders, right? If they survived those acid tests and kind of made a bigger name for themselves, and there was more proof in the pudding. So I think naturally I favor Davis here again, just because he's been there and he's done it. He's also more explosive. To me, he's sharper. He's more tested. I think, Martin represents an interesting style match here. Like whenever you have two athletic guys, right? Two sharp punchers, guys who can counter. There is this kind of like you wait with bated breath when they're up against one another. It's a fast-paced chess match. Who's going to bait who into the counter, and I like that. But again, Davis is just more experienced at it. He's the more experienced chess player. And like you said, this isn't the match that I would prefer. I hope Davis, I hope he fights Lomachenko after this or Stevenson. Unfortunately, there's political problems, barriers in the way. Whenever you're talking about a PBC guy, you're talking about a PBC guy and a top ranked guy. Typically, they're not very political. They don't reach across the aisle and shake hands. So we're all just kind of left here wanting. But I think Davis should be the favorite. Again, he's just the more experienced chess player. And Martin, I don't know what his chin is exactly like. Maybe he'll be able to weather the storm. He'll be able to do things that nobody else has been able to do. I don't know. We won't know until they get in the ring and they perform. But I have Davis a pretty heavy favorite here.
I think I think we underrate Davis a little bit due to the fact that we're all kind of annoyed with the promotional politics.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of it. Because if you look at Davis's record, this is a thing. You're just as aware of this as I am. Like if you go on X, you see these political divisions between, the kind of like the PBC guys and the guys who don't like PBC or understand that a lot of the PBC guys are, protected in a sense, and everybody under every promotional banner is protected in a sense, right? These guys are matchmakers. They want to make the most money they can. But it is still one of those things. Like Davis just he doesn't have his acid test, right? Like he's been in with some good fighters, but Isaac Cruz, like we're still not sure where Isaac Cruz or Isaac Cruz, whatever. We're still not quite sure where he fits in the lightweight picture. Like he's good, but Davis was also hurt during that bout. So, was it a matter of Davis, being hurt or Cruz, whatever? The thing though is it's just a big political mess at the moment because we just don't know. Again, I've said that a lot on this podcast so far, but that's part of the problem with modern boxing is you're not matched as tough as you used to be. So we just have a ton of questions. And until those questions are answered, again, we're just sitting here with our hands up wondering, well, when is it going to happen? And just the rate at which it happens. It's like, well, Davis was a title holder at 130. He broke into the top 10 in 2016, 2015? We're talking about damn near a decade, and he still hasn't fought an elite level fighter. So I understand the frustration, but it just may be the case that he actually is the best lightweight in the world. We just need him to prove it, though.
Who do you think his so-called kryptonite would be? A mover and shaker like a Lomachenko or Shakur Stevenson?
Well, I probably would have said something like that a while back, especially after the Gamboa fight, because, Davis looked pretty winded in that. I think he threw about 30 punches around. It might even have been worse than that. I thought it would be a volume guy, maybe like William Zepeda. He's got excellent stamina and excellent work rate. But Stevenson, to me, would probably be the worst style matchup for him just because he's so technically sharp. He's kind of one of those guys who makes you lead. So I think it's his size, his speed, he's not a big power puncher. So, that might not deter Davis, but to me, Stevenson is probably, I don't know if I want to say kryptonite. I think that would be a competitive fight, but I think Stevenson is probably the worst matchup for him. I think Zepeda is one of the more interesting ones. Like I said, kind of circling back to what I said, you know, I'd like to see how Davis handles a guy who's aggressive and tough and has a good work rate and decent pop. Those guys have a tendency um, to 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 perform pretty well against boxers like Davis. Jose Luis Castillo with Floyd Mayweather. A work rate guy, good power, etc. There are plenty of examples you can think of, but Zepeda, Stevenson. I think Lomachenko would be a damn good fight too, just because. Lomachenko's competitive against anybody. He's just got that skill. But I would like to see, how they handle one another, how the chess match, how that would play out, because Davis is waiting for a counter shot and Lomachenko has this effective, nuanced aggression, and he's also a good body puncher. So I think any of those fights are great, but Stevenson to me is probably the worst matchup for him, and I don't think we get it.
No, we definitely all the ones that we won, we don't get unless Saudi throw money at Al Heyman, Top Rank, and Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren like they have been doing, and then say, hey, we want to make Shakur Stevenson against Gervonta Davis. Then we might see it. He's just playing kind of like fantasy football in real life with the people that he wants. He has that much money. He's just making it in a game in real life. So. Yeah,
well, it kind of shows you how messed up boxing is, right? It takes some like I don't know what this guy did in the past. I'm not familiar with him, but if it takes some oil prince or whatever he is to kind of toss around dollars to help make the biggest fights in boxing, I mean, to me, it shows how shitty the sport is. I don't know if I'm sorry for cussing, but it is one of those things like if we just had a well-run organization and they just demanded it, and I don't mean we have to have something like UFC, but if you just made the best fight the best, or if there was less titles, less divisions, whatever, any of these things that would make the divisions fuller with talent and make the prizes more limited. But no, if we've got to wait for this guy to kind of do the magic wand bit and get these guys together.
Also on that card, we have David Benavidez returns 28-0 up against Alexander Glovovnik, the Nail, 20-1 for the WBC interim light heavyweight championship. You'd have thought it, Glovovnik, the Nail, retired after losing the title to Beterbiev. Now, years and years later, he's back.
Yeah, and I think he has looked his age. I do think the time off has affected him. He's not as sharp as he used to be. He's not a prime guy. I think he's 35, 36 right now. I might be a little off there. But Gvozdyk, to me, he's looked a little aged. He's just not quite as sharp as he used to be. And that's why I favored Benavidez. Benavidez, I thought, would jump to 175 long before now, after his weight problems earlier in his career. And plus, he's just a big guy. I don't even know how he's made 168 for so long. Maybe he's done the nutrition bit, gotten that together, because we've seen that with Gervonta Davis as well. Like, he was struggling with his weight, got a nutrition coach, and, everything's been a bit better, same with activity. But Benavidez, to me, I think is just a bit too explosive here. With Gvozdyk's age and his technical ability, right, which is why he's called the Nail, I think he's going to pose problems for Benavidez earlier, a bit like Caleb Plant did. But I think Benavidez is he's just too young. He's just too big. His work rate is good. His combinations are some of the best in boxing. And I think he just eventually catches up to Gvozdyk, and I think he stops him late. I like Gvozdyk. I've liked him for a long time, and I hope he performs well. He was on that Ukrainian team that's become so revered. But, after the Beterbiev defeat, I just think I don't think his heart is in it quite like it used to be, right? Like I don't think this is quite so much a resurgence as it is I still have some passion for the game and I want to see what I can do. I think if the going gets tough for Gvozdyk, I think he's going to pack it in. I just don't think he wants it as badly as Benavidez. Benavidez is still young, he's still hungry, and he's still got a lot of money to make.
Do you think Benavidez, now that he's moved up to light heavyweight, will still be able to adopt that kind of juggernaut style? Because now he's going to be facing guys of a similar size. Because before he kind of, maybe it's too strong a word, just weight bullied people.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part he will be. If he faced somebody like Beterbiev, who I think is, I mean, the guy's, I think, on his way out, despite his recent performances. Beterbiev at 40 years old, it's one of those things. Your time is pretty limited here, so I think against most of these guys, he will be able to do that. Against a guy like Bivol, it's harder to say because Bivol to me is a small 175 pounder. I don't want to play. I don't want to play matchmaker with him though. But it's just when I look at these guys like, Yarde and Boatsy I mean, just looking at the landscape here, Hutchinson, who had a good performance not long ago, Callum Smith, I guess, is still on the back end of the top 10. Yeah, I think Benavidez can punk most of these guys. When he was at 168 and he was weighing in, I mean, the dude's basically a cruiserweight come fight night anyways. And I think a lot of these 175 pounders are about the same as well. So I do think he will be able to play that up. If he moves up, probably not. But yeah, for the time being, I think he does. But it's going to be a bit tougher naturally, right? He's given up, as I said earlier, when you start giving up the things that made you effective in the division below, things become harder. And it will become a little harder, but given his talent level, I think he's going to get by with it for a while.
I think the original plan was the winner of Bivol and Beterbiev to face the winner of Benavidez and the Nail. So I'm going from your review, you think Benavidez beats the Nail?
Yeah, I think he stops him late. Again, like I said, I think like Plant, Gvozdyk gives him problems early. He moves well. Technically, he's very sharp. He usually sticks to short combinations. So, the prospect of being counterpunched isn't as big as it is with, some other guys. So I think he does well early. But Benavidez has shown a good chin. So he's a tough guy. He can weather the storm. His defense is good enough to where he can, again, it's the Plant formula, in my opinion. He lets Gvozdyk get off early, and then he starts to wear on him late. And then he stops him, I believe. And then, yeah, I hope he gets the Beterbiev winner. Because to me, 175 it's not packed. So Benavidez, to me, even if he beats Gvozdyk, I think he's the guy who should be in line next, unless Beterbiev and Bivol have a draw. Then they need to come back and solve that. But otherwise, Benavidez is the top contender.
Who's your favorite in the Bivol-Beterbiev matchup?
Probably Bivol at this point. I just think if they would have done this when Beterbiev was younger, because this is the problem with 175 too, and I think people have let these guys off the hook for too long. These guys have been ranked in the same division. I think they've been title holders alongside one another for roughly half a decade. I don't understand why they've gotten a pass where so many other guys have not. But I favor Bivol just because of his youth, right? If this had happened 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I would probably favor Beterbiev just because he's stronger, he hits so hard. But it's also one of those things, I think he's just a bit more proven. Bivol is phenomenal, though. I mean, I think technically he's just too sharp and he's just too quick at this point. And it makes it interesting both because they're not volume punchers. So it's going to be this kind of fencing contest, but, Beterbiev holding the power edge and the strength edge. That's one of the more interesting aspects of the fight I want to see play out. Like, can Beterbiev back him up consistently? Can he start laying leather on him? Because technically he's nearly as good, but I think he's lost just a little bit with his age. So again, I think it's going to be an excellent fencing contest. I just think Bivol he's just younger. He's just a bit sharper at this point. I wish it would have happened earlier, but if Beterbiev wins that, whoever wins that is a certified pound for pounder, in my opinion. Like I know Bivol got high ratings after, winning handily against Canelo Alvarez, and rightfully so. Alvarez has been effective even at 175. But I just think this is this is the rubber stamp. We know who the man in the division is, and we don't have to do any guesswork. And then we've got a good challenger afterwards in Benavidez. So it's a win-win in my opinion.
Bivol and Beterbiev dancing around for 5 years, Jeremiah. That's nothing in boxing.
Yeah, it's really not. I mean, it's almost par for the course anymore, and this is what's so frustrating about being a fan. It's like, remember we had a potential golden era in the lightweights with Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, Vasil Lomachenko, and how many of those fights, came off? I mean, it took Devin Haney jumping to 140 before we finally got the Garcia fight, and Lomachenko has kind of been. Lomachenko is just kind of a smaller guy, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear that because he's been at 135 for a long time, but it's also it's an age thing, right? Like he's past 35 at the moment, and he should have been getting these fights a while ago, but it's constant. People do this all the time. They look at a division like 147 not long ago. They look at the division and they're like Crawford and and there's Ennis and there's Errol Spence. Well, Crawford goes and schools Errol Spence, and then he jumps up to 154 for a title, and now it's just Ennis kind of playing ball by himself. And so things move very quickly in boxing, and because of all of the safe havens with the junior/super divisions, it's so much easier nowadays for fights to get put off. I mean, I could give you tons of examples of fights that I had hoped happen, going all the way back to the late 90s, with Kostya Tszyu and Oscar De La Hoya. And, there are so many fights we never get because there are just too many belts and there are too many divisions. And I know that may sound anachronistic to some people, but it's just one of those it's one of those hills that I'm willing to die on. I just think there's too many places we can go. Like even Inua, like he skips 112, and I'm not saying he ducked anybody. I'm just saying he bypassed, right? We didn't get a fight with Gonzalez. We didn't get a fight with Ioka. We didn't get a fight with Estrada. We didn't get a fight with I'm missing the Filipino guy. Now I'm forgetting his name, but my point is that because of the titles, because of the divisions, we miss a lot of these potential golden eras, and we wind up getting guys milking the titles and divisions, and it's not a good look. And I've been ragging on the sport for many years because of it, but things have picked up in recent years, so I can't be too hard on it. We got Fury, we got Usyk, we've gotten some good stuff. Beterbiev and Bivol is on the way, and things look better because of the money, but we shouldn't have to do this, right? We shouldn't have to sit on our hands and wait for it and be like, oh, finally, it's not how you should run a sport.
So kind of finishing our fantasy matchups. So Beterbiev over the nail, Bivol over Beterbiev. So who would you favor in Bivol against Benavidez?
Well, I'm gonna stick with Bivol. I do think see the reason why is because I think Plant and Gvozdyk, they expose certain things about Benavidez. He is one of those guys, he fights like a lot of modern guys, and it kind of annoys me. Not that he's not skilled, but he does kind of have this ego thing where, like it's kind of hard to put into words, but a lot of these guys fight in like you touched me, but I'm gonna get you, and it's just kind of this. It's played up too much in my opinion. Like a lot of guys, I guess to put it more succinctly, a lot of guys just don't get down to business, right? Benavidez will take his time in getting to these guys, right? Like with Caleb Plant, it's like, oh, I'm gonna get you at some point. But I think with Bivol, he's not gonna get him at some point. And I think Bivol is such an astute fencer, right? His defense is phenomenal. He's just like, if you look at some of the things that he does with his parries, the way he blocks, I just don't think he gives Benavidez enough chance to counterpunch to actually make a big enough difference to win that fight. I think Bivol is just too sharp with his straight punches, and he's just so good with his footwork. That is one of Benavidez' problems, in my opinion, is like he'll track you down eventually, but he doesn't like to move his feet consistently, right? He's not one of the guys, he's not the kind of guy to circle around you and box. He will come at you, but if you look at the guys who move well, he has issues with them. Again, I think Plant and I think Gvozdyk are going to show that. And I think Bivol would be the one to ultimately expose those flaws and, take a unanimous decision. I don't think he's stopping Benavidez, but I just think Bivol is the man at this point.
Will we ever see Benavidez against Canelo?
I don't think so. No, I think Alvarez is content at 168. He's getting a lot of what he wants. So he's getting a lot of what he wants at this point, right? Like, there's a potential IBF thing going on where he's got to fight some dude who, nobody knows, really hasn't earned his keep. But, IBF has to play by the rules. They have to play by the rules in part. I know a lot of people don't like this, but IBF has to play by the rules because they're an American organization. And they've already been investigated for, doing unsavory things. So they've got to stick by their rules better than the other organizations do. So if it comes to, stripping Alvarez, they're going to do that. But other than that, the WBC basically gives him whatever he wants. He can do what he likes at this point. And I think he's just going to, because he is on the decline, I think that's pretty well accepted at this point. If you don't think so, that's perfectly fine too. But I just think he is slipping a bit. And I just think he's just got to make money, and 168 isn't a great division. And the two guys we were kind of hoping would be his top contenders, not only in Benavidez but also in David Morrell, those guys are no longer there, at least from what I understand. I understand Morrell has moved up to 175 along with Benavidez, so there's just not a lot on the horizon for Alvarez, right? There's nobody that we're really clamoring for. So I think he's just going to make money, beat guys. He's going to do what he's continued to do. He's going to beat guys who are quality, and he's going to make good money doing it. But I don't really see an elite level opponent, barring Terrence Crawford, maybe. I'm not even sure that comes off. And even that is, that's a big step up for Crawford, so I'm not quite sure, but I just think he's going to do what he's continued to do: beat good opponents and make good money doing it.
Sadly, you're probably right. Gary Antoine Russell, 17-0, goes up against Albert Puello who's 22-0 for the WBC interim super lightweight championship. Another interim belt, just what we wanted. How do you see this one going, Jeremiah?
Well, I think Russell wins this pretty handily. I mean, that's the goofy thing too, right? The interim belts. It's like they let you fight for interim belts when there's no interim champion, right? Like interim was originally a denominator for a champion who was out, right? Like when Costa got hurt in the 90s, he was out with injuries, and eventually they stripped him. But it's one of those things like, well, is he injured, right? Is he gone off to fight a war? Okay, yeah, then an interim titleist makes sense. But at this point, it's just the alphabet soup organizations milking guys for money. But I think Russell wins this pretty handily. Puello, he showed up. Against oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name all of a sudden now, but he showed up, and he performed well for an older guy. But Russell is not. God, I keep wanting to call him Rolo for some dumb reason, but Russell is a workhorse. He's got good power, good combinations. He's an interesting prospect. Puello to me is just, he had his moment in his last fight, performing better than expected. But Russell is an ascending guy. He's young, good stamina, again, good work rate. I just think he overwhelms Puello and he stops him probably in the mid rounds. I see that as a fairly sizable mismatch, despite Russell not really being tested at this juncture. I mean, he fought Postol and ended up getting the stoppage there. Thought it was a little bit controversial, but yeah, I think that's a pretty big mismatch.
Yeah, if he does get the stoppage, that'll be 18 wins by stoppage for Gary Antoine Russell. Some record.
Yeah, well, again, that's why I think with the Postol fight, that's why I thought that stoppage was a bit questionable. And I think they were just trying to keep the perfect knockout record, but it is what it is. I mean, stuff like this happens all the time. I mean, I remember thinking about heavyweights, Joshua, Wilder, I think when he fought the big French guy whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, but Russell looks good. Is he going to be as good as his brother Gary Russell? I don't know. I mean, Gary Russell was a phenomenal talent, inactive, right? Wasted a lot of his career, but was an excellent, fighter. So, we'll see. Pueblo, I don't think is the test we need to figure out where Russell kind of lands, in the division. It's a good class, though.
Also on that card, Carlos Adames, 23-1, goes up against Terrell Gausha, 24-3-1. This for the WBC middleweight championship of the world. Gausha back on the big time. PBC seemed to like him. He's given him 1, 2, 3, 4 different chances. What do you think about this fight?
Well, maybe like Leo Santa Cruz, he named his kid after Al Heyman. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know. Geisha he's a good fighter. He's quality. He'll give you rounds. He performed, I would say, serviceably against Tim Tszyu, right? He knocked him down. He's a good fighter. I mean, he's a quality boxer, but he's not dangerous. So it's kind of like it's safe. And, Adames needs to stay active anyways. A lot of these guys do. I mean, activity is the problem with the vast majority of these guys. So Adames is arguably the top middleweight in the world, along with gosh, tonight is not my night when it comes to names, but and his name is Janibek. Just kind of stray away from the difficulty of his last name. But Adames and Janibek are the top 2 in this division. Again, politically, it doesn't really work out, but I think Adames gets a stoppage here. Geisha's good, but again, not dangerous. And Adames has done pretty well for himself. I mean, he suffered a relatively early loss, but he's good technically. He's a good puncher. He's got enough craft to perform at the highest of levels. And, because the division has thinned out a lot, for me, he couldn't carve out a nice little legacy for himself. And I don't use legacy in the term like he's going to be an all-time great or, people are going to be putting him up there with, the best middleweights of the last 25 years. I just mean the division is not particularly good. And because of that, he can make a decent amount of defenses. Or he can target some of the PBC guys. If one of the Charlos can make 160, if they ever decide to get active, there's money there. That would be a fight I think we would all be interested in. But if we could make the crossover fight in Janibek, they're number 1 and number 2, that would be, a new ring lineal championship. And that's my focus. I just want the best guys to fight the best. I'm not asking too much, or at least I don't think so. So ultimately, that's kind of what I hope for, but I'm not gonna get all antsy with that one because again, politically, it's just probably not going to happen.
That is true. Boxing politics, as Lennox Lewis used to say.
Yeah, it's almost as annoying as politics, in the White House or in Parliament. I think we're all kind of like having a political fatigue at this point, but Adames is good. I like him, and just make the fights. I guess, none of my pleas are going to go to any of the people who matter, but it is one of those things like Adames is a good fighter. Is he an elite level guy? No, I don't think so. Is Janibek an elite level guy? Is he, he's a good hair, for Golovkin, right? They're both from Kazakhstan. It's cool to watch Janibek kind of following his footsteps, but do I think he's Golovkin incarnate? No, I don't. I think he's a good fighter. who was it, Brantley, who gave him a fairly tough time. But I just want these guys to fight. And this is the thing too. This is the funny thing about boxing. And I don't mean to rant here, but it is, whenever the top guys actually fight each other, the perception about the division automatically changes, right? Like, use 140 pounds as an example. Was Josh Taylor, was Ramirez, was Prograis, were they actually elite level guys? I think in light of what we've seen, probably not. Watching Lopez school Taylor and watching Devin Haney school Prograis, yeah, they probably weren't elite level guys when it's all said and done, at least not on a pound for pound sense. But because they actually fought each other, the perception that they were elite was what kind of got into the mainstream. It permeated into the mainstream, and that's all you really need, right? Even with the WBSS, 168 pound tournament, were those guys all elite? Callum Smith really hasn't fleshed out to be that good. I mean, he's obviously a good fighter, and I use good more liberally than a lot of guys. But it's turned out that a lot of these guys, they just fought each other, and the perception was that they were elite or that the division was better. And so I'm just hoping that these guys actually just man up, do the business, and then the perception will change. Because 160 pounds right now, in light of Alvarez and Golovkin retiring, it's considered an incredibly weak division. There's no excitement there. So just fight, and that'll change.
It's true. News and notes this week. Boxing star Ryan Garcia was arrested Saturday for felony vandalism after a Beverly Hills hotel accused him of causing $15,000 worth of damage. Where do we start? Where do we start on Ryan Garcia, I guess?
Well, I mean, where do we start with a lot of these guys? I mean, it's a circus. I mean, I don't typically pay attention to these sorts of things, like Garcia, he's weird, man. It's like you look at his tweets and he's all over the place. It's like, is he suffering, from head trauma early in his career? It's the nuance of these things is so hard to pick out nowadays, because to me, the game is more ego driven than ever, because a lot of these guys, as I said, a lot of these guys don't have to go through the acid test as early as fighters, the fighters of yesteryear, right? If you were a contender in 1955, your Carmen Basilio or your Florentino Fernandez or Emil Griffith, any number of these guys, they stayed active, and sometimes they took a bump in the road to guys maybe you think they shouldn't have. But what it did was it made the game less ego-driven, right? Like, a loss is just kind of something you shrug at, maybe you had the flu, whatever. But these guys, the zero in the loss column and the way these guys are maneuvered makes for me, it breaks their egos quicker, if that makes sense. Because, you got this Instagram following and this Twitter following and all these people kissing your ass. And, there's a bunch of yes men around you. You're the best, this, you're that, and you only fight a few times a year. So to me, losses take a much bigger toll nowadays than they used to. But Garcia's just kind of been weird from the beginning. I mean, he's had all sorts of like baby mama issues, and it's just hard to find, like, where's the source of all this? I don't know. But in light of the drug testing thing and the felony stuff, and then they put out a press report saying that his mom is going through something tough at the moment, and then he'll circle back to Jesus a lot, like trying to convey some strong spiritual message, and it's just like, I don't know where the consistency is, and it's just, I don't want to say the wheels are falling off, because I really don't know. I'm not in his camp. I don't know the guy on a personal level, but it's just weird, and it's just, I mean, it's sound bites, right? We're in a sound bite game, and people love that sort of stuff, but it's not my thing. And I think a lot of these guys could probably stand to live a bit cleaner, just a bit more kind of like Warriors code, if that makes sense, right? Like, leave the hoes, on Instagram, man. Don't court them. Don't let them get in your business. Settle down, be a family man, take your losses, live more stoically. I just think there's just too much ego in the game, and Garcia needs to. Again, I don't know. It's hard to give him advice because I don't know him that well. But it's a lot of these guys just need to live a bit closer to the base, if that makes sense, right? Like Rocky style against Drago. Like you don't have all the trappings of modernity distracting you. So I don't know, man. I don't. Maybe you've got some more on this. Maybe you have an opinion on this, but I'm not even sure where to go with it.
No, like you say, it's all over the place, and it just hopefully, fingers crossed, he gets well, because there's obviously something going on, mentally, and we don't know what it is, but fingers crossed, he's a big draw for the sport, and
Yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe he got syphilis from one of those Instagram girls, and it's getting to his brain. Maybe he forgot to take a pill for it. I don't know, man. This sort of stuff happens too often. Like we talked about Broner earlier, right? I mean, he's done some weird stuff too, right? Like there was a sex tape out there, and he's like partying all the time. And when you do these things are not conducive to the long-term health of your career. Guys should just do more like Bernard Hopkins, live a bit cleaner, stay in the gym more often. I don't know, man. It's just weird. And, like what exactly comes of this, with a positive drug test? Does he get a rematch with Haney? I don't know, somewhere down the road. I don't know. I mean, see, that's the thing in boxing too, is drug tests it's just a speed bump. Nobody really condemns you forever. So at some point, because he's a big sell, he's going to get another big fight. So I don't know, man. It's all kind of like water under the bridge. It's like weird right now, but just like Broner, he's going to get a big fight in the future. So to me, it doesn't really stop anything.
Talking of big fights, Manny Pacquiao, Mario Barrios for the WBC welterweight title has been explored for this fall in Las Vegas. And this news comes from Sean Gibbons, the president of Manny Pacquiao Promotions. Well, Manny Pacquiao could be coming back. Trying to think, one fight too far, you think?
Well, maybe. I mean, I think Pacquiao is slated for I think he's slated for an exhibition against a Japanese fella. So I know he's staying in shape. And Barrios is Barrios is a good fighter, but if you're targeting anybody with a title, he's pretty much the dude. Barrios he's got a lot of holes in his game. And so, part of me is like, well, Pacquiao's probably too old. He's been too inactive. But then part of me thinks that he could actually beat Barrios because Barrios he's so flawed. But then you kind of think like, well, has Pacquiao fallen? I mean, I guess you gotta favor Barrios, right? I mean, he beat Ugas, and Ugas beat Pacquiao, right? I mean, it's not always in boxing. Things aren't always that simple, and if Pacquiao still thinks that he has it, these organizations and these commissions, they're gonna play ball. Just because Pacquiao makes so much money. I don't want to see it happen. I want to see more deserving challengers get a shot. And I don't even think Barrios is all that deserving, to be honest with you. But I just think because of the money that can be made, the welterweight division is in a transition phase. It's not particularly strong. I think the organization, I think the state, I think they're going to play ball. If he actually wants to go through with it, I think they're going to do it. I don't think they should. I think he should earn it just like everybody else, but it's not exactly a game of merit. Or the merit is more so dollars than it is, what you've done in the ring recently. And so we'll see. I mean, I guess I would favor Barrios. I don't want to see it happen, honestly. I want to see somebody else get it.
Good old boxing. Never fails to give us something to talk about, right?
Yeah, that is the thing. It is a soundbite generator, right? It is a revolving door of things to gossip about. And that's part of the reason why I stopped doing podcasts. It was just during COVID, that's all it was, like, oh, it's Twitter beefs and, and fights in, silent arenas. It was so damn obnoxious. And, these guys just need to get on with business. That's my problem. It's like they waste so much time with filler and we're just like, okay, well, let's get to the good stuff, right? It's like watching a movie and we're like, where's the climax, right? All right, okay.
Well, Jeremiah, I appreciate you jumping on and giving me an hour and a half of your night. If you want to tell everyone where they can find you and follow you.
Yeah, so I am at Griffo's Hanky on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it still. It's a reference to young Griffo, the old Australian fighter. He was a drunkard, didn't really train much, but he would go into a bar and challenge guys to hit him in the face, and he would stand on a handkerchief. And if they couldn't hit him, they had to buy him a drink. And it's not a reference to a drinking problem for me. It's just one of those cool stories that you often hear about the old timers. And you can just find me, Jeremiah Preisser, on Facebook. I prefer Facebook personally, just because it's more conducive to long form conversation. But I spend a lot of time on, well, I don't want to say I spend a lot of time, but I spend some time on X too. And so, yeah, I'm pretty personable. If you want to comment on my stuff, I'm not a dictator when it comes to whatever you comment on my stuff. I don't get all butt blasted about, you having a dissenting opinion. It's all good.
And we are at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. Be sure to join us next week. We'll be reviewing all the fights that we just spoke about. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.